Karen stared at the note until the words blurred. She'd always prided herself on being strong, on never backing down, on winning at all costs. But standing there in her empty backyard, she realized that some costs were too high to pay. The next morning, Karen did something she hadn't done in years. She admitted she was wrong. She started with Margaret Chen, her former friend who'd helped her move in 8 years ago, who'd brought soup when Karen had the flu, who'd listened to her complain about her divorce and her job and her mother's health. Margaret answered the door, but didn't invite Karen in. "I know you're angry," Karen began, her voice shakier than she'd intended. "I know I've been difficult." Difficult? Margaret's laugh was bitter. "Karen, you sued the HOA. You sued our neighbors. You turned this entire community upside down for a swimming pool." "I was legally right," Karen said, then immediately wished she hadn't. Even now, even trying to apologize, she couldn't help defending herself. "You were legally right," Margaret agreed, "but you were humanly wrong. You forgot that we're not just neighbors, we're friends." Or we were. The conversation was painful, but it was just the beginning. Karen spent the next week going door to door, trying to repair relationships that she'd shattered in her quest for the perfect pool. Some neighbors slammed the door in her face. Others listened politely but remained distant. A few, like Tom Morrison, seemed genuinely puzzled by the whole situation. "I don't understand," he said. "It's just a pool. Why is everyone so upset?" Karen tried to explain, but how do you tell someone that it was never about the pool? That it was about control, about being right, about proving that she was better than everyone else? That she'd spent so many years building walls around herself that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something bigger. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later, during the monthly HOA meeting. Karen had been attending religiously, trying to rebuild bridges, when Bob Patterson announced his resignation as interim president. "I'm too old for this job," he said, looking directly at Karen. "We need someone younger, someone who understands how to bring people together instead of driving them apart." The room was silent. Then, unexpectedly, Margaret Chen stood up. "I nominate Karen Whitmore," she said. The gasps were audible. Karen felt the blood drain from her face. "I know what you're thinking," Margaret continued. "But Karen knows these covenants better than anyone. She's proven she can fight for what she believes in. Maybe it's time she fought for all of us." The vote was close. Closer than Karen had expected. She won by a single vote, her own. And she wasn't even sure she should have cast it. Her first act as HOA president was to propose a complete revision of the community covenant, with input from every homeowner. Her second was to organize a neighborhood barbecue, held in the community center since her backyard pool area was still too charged with controversy. The barbecue was better attended than her pool party, but the atmosphere was cautious. People were willing to give her a chance, but trust would have to be earned. As Karen stood watching her neighbors eat hamburgers and make small talk, she caught sight of her house through the window. The pool was still there, still beautiful, still everything she dreamed of. But it looked different now, not like a trophy, but like a reminder. She'd gotten her dream pool, but she'd lost herself in the process. Now she had to figure out if it was possible to rebuild not just her relationships, but her identity. The answer, she suspected, was going to be more complicated than any HOA covenant she'd ever navigated. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that her biggest battles were still ahead of her. The first thing Karen Whitmore's neighbors heard at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday wasn't their alarm clocks. It was the earth-shaking roar of a bulldozer carving through what used to be her pristine backyard. Margaret Chen nearly dropped her coffee mug as she peered through her kitchen window to see Karen, still in her silk pajamas and fuzzy slippers, directing a crew of bewildered construction workers with the precision of a field general. "No, no, no," Karen shrieked, her voice carrying across Willowbrook Estates like a battle cry. "I said kidney-shaped, not lima bean. Do I look like someone who settles for lima beans?" The foreman, a weathered man named Tony, who'd clearly dealt with difficult clients before, scratched his head. "Ma'am, we haven't even started digging yet. We're just clearing. Don't ma'am me. I've been planning this pool for 3 years, and I will not have my vision compromised by amateur hour." Karen planted her hands on her hips. the morning sun catching the rhinestones on her pajama top. This is going to be the crown jewel of the neighborhood, and everyone will finally understand what real luxury looks like. Within hours, the phone tree in Willowbrook Estates was buzzing. Karen hadn't just failed to get HOA approval, she'd completely bypassed the entire process. As the newly elected HOA president, she'd apparently decided that the rules were more like suggestions. "She can't do this," muttered Bob Patterson, the former HOA president who Karen had unseated in what could only be described as a hostile takeover involving homemade cookies and vicious campaign flyers. "The covenant clearly states that any major landscaping changes require board approval." But Karen was already 3 moves ahead. She'd spent weeks researching every loophole, every technicality, every possible angle. The HOA rules mentioned structures and additions, but pools were technically excavations. It was a distinction that would either make her a neighborhood legend or a cautionary tale. By noon, she'd already fielded 17 angry phone calls and had begun documenting each one in a leather-bound notebook she'd labeled Pool Project Opposition Research. Every complaint, every threat, every snide comment was carefully catalogued. Karen had learned long ago that information was power, and she intended to wield it like a weapon. "This is war," she whispered to herself, watching the excavator take its first massive bite out of her backyard. The machine's bucket came up full of dark earth and torn grass, and Karen felt a thrill of vindication. Let them come. Let them all come. She had no idea that her dream pool would cost her everything she'd worked so hard to build, and some things she never knew she had. The emergency HOA meeting was standing room only, packed tighter than a sardine can with angry neighbors clutching copies of the community covenant. Karen arrived fashionably late, her heels clicking against the community center's linoleum floor like a countdown timer. She traded her pajamas for a power suit, navy blue with gold buttons, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd already won. "Karen Whitmore," Bob Patterson announced, his voice dripping with barely contained rage, "you are in direct violation of Article 7, Section 3 of our community standards. This meeting is to address your unauthorized pool installation." Karen smiled, a predator's grin that made several neighbors shift uncomfortably. "Actually, Bob, I'd like to address the board's failure to process my application in a timely manner. I submitted my request 3 months ago." "You submitted a request for a small water feature," snapped Janet Rodriguez, the secretary. "Not an Olympic-sized swimming pool with a waterfall and a pool house." "I said water feature. I never specified size limitations." Karen pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "I've done my homework. The covenant defines major alterations as changes to existing structures. My pool is ground-level excavation, which falls under landscaping modifications. Subsection C clearly states that landscaping changes under $15,000 require only written notification." The room erupted. Neighbors shouted over each other, voices rising in a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. Karen stood calmly in the center of it all, waiting for the storm to pass. 15,000. Margaret Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "That pool is costing you $60,000 if it's costing you a penny." Karen's smile never wavered. The excavation and basic installation cost $14,850. The decorative elements, the waterfall, the lighting, the pool house, are separate aesthetic choices that don't require board approval under the current covenant language. She was technically right, and everyone knew it. The covenant, written in 1987, had never anticipated someone like Karen, someone who would dissect every word, exploit every ambiguity, and weaponize legal technicalities like a corporate lawyer. "This is insane," Bob muttered, but Karen heard it. "What's insane?" she said, her voice rising to fill the room, "is that I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years, paid my dues, followed every arbitrary rule, and the one time I want to improve my property, increase all our property values, I might add, I'm treated like a criminal." The meeting devolved into smaller arguments, neighbor turning against neighbor. Some sided with Karen, tired of the HOA's micromanagement. Others demanded she tear out the half-completed pool immediately. Karen watched it all with satisfaction. Division was exactly what she'd wanted. After 2 hours of heated debate, the board voted to seek legal counsel. Karen had 30 days to halt construction or face potential fines and legal action. 30 days, she repeated, packing up her documents. That's interesting, because my pool will be finished in 28. As she walked to her car, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. But the satisfaction of seeing Bob Patterson's red face made it all worthwhile. For now, Karen's pool was magnificent. Even her harshest critics had to admit it was a masterpiece. A sparkling oasis with a rock waterfall, underwater lighting that turned the water into liquid sapphire, and a pool house that looked like it belonged in a luxury resort. The grand opening party was scheduled for Saturday, and Karen had spared no expense on catering, decorations, and a DJ who specialized in sophisticated poolside ambience. She'd won. The legal battle had dragged on for months, but her lawyer had successfully argued that the HOA's covenant was too vague to be enforceable. The judge had ruled in Karen's favor, and she'd been awarded attorney's fees. It was a complete vindication. So why did she feel so empty? The answer came at 3 p.m. on Friday, exactly 1 hour before her caterer was supposed to arrive. Karen was in her kitchen, arranging orchids in crystal vases, when she noticed the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a lazy afternoon, but the deliberate, pointed silence of people actively avoiding her. Her phone hadn't rung in 3 days. Her doorbell hadn't chimed. Even the mail carrier, who used to chat about the weather, now just dropped packages and hurried away. Karen walked to her front window and peered through the blinds. Margaret Chen was in her driveway, talking to Janet Rodriguez. They were both looking at Karen's house, and their expressions weren't friendly. When Margaret noticed Karen watching, she deliberately turned her back. The realization hit like a physical blow. She'd won the battle, but she'd lost something much more valuable. She'd lost her community. The pool party was a disaster. Of the 47 neighbors she'd invited, only 3 showed up. The elderly Mr. Peterson, who came for the free food and couldn't hear well enough to know about the drama, and the new couple from the end of the street who hadn't lived there long enough to understand the history. Karen stood by her beautiful pool, watching the DJ pack up his equipment 2 hours early, and felt the full weight of her victory. She'd gotten everything she'd wanted and nothing she'd needed. Beautiful pool, said Tom Morrison, the new neighbor, as he prepared to leave. Must have taken a lot of work to get it approved. Yes, Karen replied, her voice hollow. It did. After everyone left, Karen sat alone on her pool deck, surrounded by untouched appetizers and wilting flowers. The water was perfect, crystal clear, the exact temperature she dreamed of. The waterfall trickled soothingly, the lights created a magical ambience, and the pool house was equipped with everything she could possibly need. She'd never felt more alone in her life. That night, Karen couldn't sleep. She wandered through her house, past the awards and certificates that lined her walls. HOA President of the Year, Community Volunteer Recognition, Neighborhood Beautification Award, all meaningless now. At 2 a.m., she found herself standing at her back door, staring at the pool she'd fought so hard to build. In the darkness, it looked different, not like a symbol of triumph, but like a very expensive monument to everything she'd lost. And then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Someone had left a note on her pool deck, weighed down with a rock. With trembling hands, she opened it. The message was brief. Some victories aren't worth winning. A former friend.